Listen carefully. If you ever find yourself deep in the forests of Oregon, far past the marked trails, beyond the last reassuring signpost, there's something you need to remember. If you smell cooking meat and you don't see a campsite, leave immediately. Don't call out. Don't follow the scent. Don't try to be polite. Just leave, because the people who did follow it well, they're the reason hikers don't talk about this out loud anymore. They whisper. The forests in Oregon don't behave like ordinary forests. They stretch too far. The trees grow too tall, too tightly packed, as if they're trying to keep something contained, or maybe trying to keep you from leaving. Light struggles to reach the ground in certain areas, even at midday, and sound travels strangely, like it's being absorbed rather than echoed. Seasoned hikers know this. They joke about it, call it the green silence. But there's another thing they don't joke about: a smell. Not the clean scent of pine or damp earth, not wood smoke. No, this is something else. Something warm, rich, savory, like meat cooking slowly over an open flame. The kind of smell that makes your stomach tighten even if you've just eaten. The kind of smell that shouldn't exist miles away from the nearest road or person. It started, at least publicly, with a man named Daniel Hargrove, 36, experienced backpacker, the kind of guy who carried topographic maps instead of relying on GPS. He'd hiked sections of the Pacific Northwest for years and had a habit of documenting everything: audio logs, written notes, timestamps, which is why what happened to him didn't just vanish. Pieces of it stayed behind, enough to piece together something incomplete, distorted, but real. Day 3, early evening. Daniel had already been out there for a couple of days, long enough for the silence to settle in, long enough for routine to take over. Set camp, filter water, check gear, record thoughts. Normal. That's when he first noticed it. A smell. At first he assumed it was his own cooking gear, maybe something lingering in the air from earlier. But the more he paid attention, the less sense that explanation made. It wasn't coming from his camp. It was drifting in from somewhere else. And it didn't fade. It got stronger. He described it simply in his notes like someone slow cooking meat over a fire. Rich, heavy, fresh. The kind of smell that doesn't travel far without a source close by. But there wasn't supposed to be anyone else out there. Not for miles. Later that night, curiosity got the better of him. He left his camp and followed the scent. Not far at first, just enough to confirm whether it was real. It was. The deeper he walked, the stronger it became. Thick enough that it felt like it was coating the inside of his throat. And yet no light. No voices. No fire. Nothing. Just trees. Standing too close together. Watching. He kept expecting to break into a clearing, to see a group of campers maybe laugh it off, apologize for wandering too close. But the forest never opened. It only pressed in tighter, and the smell stayed with him, perfectly consistent, as if it wasn't drifting through the air at all, but waiting for him to reach it. He turned back eventually, not out of fear, but because something about it didn't line up. Experienced hikers rely on instinct as much as skill, and his instinct was telling him something was off. Still, he didn't leave. That's the part people always get stuck on. He stayed. By morning, the smell hadn't disappeared. It lingered, faint but present, enough that he couldn't ignore it anymore. So he made a decision that, on paper, made perfect sense. He was going to track it. Systematically. Find the source, document it, and move on. Simple. He checked the wind, mapped his direction, marked his starting point. Everything done right, everything controlled. And yet, within hours, control started slipping. The smell didn't behave the way it should. It didn't drift or fade with distance. It didn't weaken when he moved away or intensify in any predictable pattern. Instead, it stayed just strong enough to keep him going. Always ahead, always just out of reach. He adjusted his path, corrected his bearings, kept moving in what he was certain was a straight line. And then he saw the creek. The same creek he had left that morning. At first, he thought it was a different one. Similar terrain, similar layout. Forests repeat themselves like that. But the longer he looked, the harder it became to deny. Same bend in the water, same fallen log across the bank, same cluster of stones near the edge. He had walked for over an hour, in a straight line, and somehow he was back where he started. That's when the tone of his notes shifted, subtly at first. Less certainty, more second-guessing. He started checking his compass more frequently, repeating measurements, marking trees as he passed them, trying to prove to himself that what he was seeing had a rational explanation. Then the sound came. It was faint, easy to miss if you weren't already on edge. A soft, irregular crackle, like wood catching flame, and beneath it, something wetter. A slow, uneven dripping. Anyone who spent time around a fire knows that sound. Fat rendering, juice hitting heat. But there was no fire. He followed the sound anyway. Because at that point, it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something else. Something quieter, more insistent. The forest seemed to change as he moved. Not visually, not in a way you could point to and say that's different. But the space between things felt wrong. Distances stretched. Directions lost meaning. The kind of disorientation that doesn't feel like being lost, but like the environment itself isn't staying consistent. And through it all, that smell, stronger now, heavier, no longer just drifting in the air. It felt localized, fixed, close. That's when he stopped moving. Because, for the first time, he thought he could see it. Not a fire, not flames, nothing that clear, just a distortion. The air ahead of him bent slightly, like heat rising off asphalt on a hot day. Subtle, easy to overlook. But once he noticed it, he couldn't unsee it. And inside that distortion, something moved. Not clearly, not fully, just enough to register as shape, form, mass, hanging. That was the word he used later, hanging. He couldn't explain why. It didn't look like anything familiar, didn't resemble an object or an animal. But his brain settled on that one idea and wouldn't let go. Hanging. The smell was overwhelming at that point, no longer just meat. It had specificity now, recognition. Pork. That detail stood out in his notes more than anything else, not because it was strange, but because it was precise. Too precise for something he couldn't see. He stayed there longer than he should have, watching, listening, breathing it in. Time became unclear after that. His notes grew shorter, less structured, words scratched out and rewritten, like he wasn't satisfied with how they came out. He mentioned shapes again, movement, the sense that whatever was in that distortion wasn't stationary, and then nothing. When search teams finally reached the area days later, they found his campsite exactly where it should have been, undisturbed. Pack intact, food untouched. No signs of panic, no signs of struggle, just absence. A few feet away, they found his recorder, still running, battery nearly dead. The final recording didn't begin like the others. No explanation, no context, just sound. A fire, close enough that every crack and pop was sharp, immediate. And beneath it, that same wet, rhythmic dripping. Seconds passed. Nothing else. Then, a voice, not Daniel's. Soft, close, almost casual. Stay. The recording ended immediately after. Daniel Hargrove was never found. No trail leading away. No evidence of where he went. Just a point where he had been and then wasn't. After his case circulated quietly among those who spent enough time in places like that, other stories began to surface. Reluctantly, never publicly, never in detail. Just fragments. Patterns. A smell that shouldn't be there. A source that can't be found. A path that doesn't behave the way it should. And always, the same mistake. Following it. People who've experienced it don't describe it as fear. Not at first. They describe it as hunger. Not physical hunger. Something else. something deeper, quieter, a pull, and the longer they stay near it, the harder it becomes to leave. Because at some point, the smell changes. It stops smelling like food and starts smelling like something familiar, something closer, something that doesn't belong to the forest at all. It belongs to you, and by the time you realize that, you're already too close. There's a reason no one publishes these stories. Not officially. Not with names, dates, coordinates, nothing that could turn whispers into something real enough to investigate. Because the few people who've come close to understanding what's happening out there don't agree on what it is. Only on one thing. It is not a place you find. It is something that finds you. After Daniel Hargrove disappeared, his case didn't make headlines. Missing hikers aren't rare in Oregon. Most get written off the same way: missteps, falls, exposure, animals. His file was processed, archived, and quietly left behind. But not entirely, because a few people noticed the details that didn't fit. And once you notice them, they start showing up everywhere. A ranger named Elise Warren was one of the first to connect the pattern. She'd been working those forests for over a decade. Search and rescue mostly. Missing persons, lost hikers, recovery operations. She'd seen enough to know when something was just an accident, and when it wasn't. Daniel's case bothered her. Not because he vanished, but because of what he left behind. His equipment was too clean, too untouched. No signs of distress, no signs of disorientation, no attempt to signal for help. It didn't look like someone who got lost. It looked like someone who stopped needing to leave. That detail stayed with her, and once it did, she started looking at older reports. Cases that hadn't made noise. Cases that had been closed too easily. She found seven disappearances over the span of 12 years, all in different sections of forest, all written off for different reasons, but all with one shared detail buried somewhere in the reports, something easy to overlook unless you were looking for it. A smell. Not all of them described it the same way. Some said food, some said smoke. One report described it as like walking past a kitchen with the door open. But two of them, stood out because those hikers didn't just mention the smell. They followed it and came back. The first was a woman named Tara Baines. She was found 3 days after being reported missing, alive, walking along a service road nearly 10 miles from where she'd last been seen. No injuries, no signs of exposure, just quiet. When they brought her in, she didn't speak for almost a full day. Not out of shock, not confusion, just refusal. Eventually, she said one thing: "I shouldn't have left." That was it. No elaboration, no explanation. Over the next few days, she started talking in fragments. Not a full account, just pieces. She described the smell first, said it was perfect, not strong, not overwhelming, just enough to make you notice it and want more. She followed it off the trail, walked longer than she meant to, lost track of time, and then she found it. Not a fire, not a campsite, a space. She struggled to describe it, called it a clearing, but then corrected herself. Said it wasn't open the way a clearing should be. Said the trees were still there, but not in the right places, like they had been moved or rearranged. At the center of it, that distortion, the same kind Daniel described, air bending, shifting, and inside it, something hanging. When they asked her what it looked like, she didn't answer directly. Just shook her head, then said something that didn't make sense at the time. It looked like it used to be people. After that, she stopped cooperating, refused further interviews, signed herself out of medical care early. 2 weeks later, she went missing again. Same region, same conditions. This time, they didn't find her. The second survivor was harder to track down. His name never made it into official reports, just initials, RK. He didn't disappear in the same way, didn't get lost, didn't call for help. He came back on his own, walked into a ranger station just before dawn, covered in dirt, clothes damp, eyes unfocused. Sat down and said, "I stayed too long." Unlike Tara, he kept talking, not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't seem to stop. He described the smell the same way: warm, inviting, familiar, but he added something new. It changes depending on who you are. At first, that didn't make sense, until he explained. When I first smelled it, it reminded me of my dad cooking. He hadn't thought about that in years. Didn't even realize he still remembered the exact scent. But there it was. Perfect. Then, as he got closer, it changed. Not dramatically, subtly. Different spices, different cuts, different memories. Things I hadn't thought about in decades. Meals, moments, specific, personal details that no one else could have known. It wasn't just food anymore. It was recognition. And that's what made him follow it. Not curiosity. Not hunger. Familiarity. By the time he reached the source, he wasn't questioning it. He was expecting it, waiting for it. He described the same distortion, the same impossible space, the same sense that the forest wasn't arranged the way it should be. And inside, those shapes, hanging. But he noticed something Tara didn't say out loud, or maybe didn't want to. They weren't still. They moved, slowly, subtly, like something breathing or shifting in place, and the smell, it wasn't coming from a fire. It was coming from them. That's when his voice changed, according to the ranger who documented the conversation. Not fear, not panic, recognition. They were cooking, he said, not over a fire. Within it, or maybe they were the fire. Even he couldn't explain it clearly. Every time he got close to describing it, he'd stop, start over, change words, like language itself wasn't enough. But one thing stayed consistent. They wanted me to stay, not through force, not through threat, through invitation. The smell grew stronger the longer he stood there, more specific, more personal, until it stopped resembling food entirely. It smelled like me. That was the exact phrasing, repeated multiple times, not sweat, not skin, something deeper, something internal. And beneath the smell, a sound, that same slow dripping. Only now he understood what it was. Not grease, not fat, something else. He left before he could figure it out, or maybe before he could accept it. He turned around, walked away, didn't run, didn't look back. And the smell followed him. Not as strong, not as precise, but present. All the way back to the trail, all the way back to the station. Even sitting there, hours later, he said he could still faintly detect it, like it had marked him. When they asked why he didn't stay, why he left when it seemed like that's what it wanted, he gave an answer that didn't fit the rest of his account. Something simple, almost detached. Because I realized something was missing. They asked him what. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the floor for a long time, then finally said, "There were no bones." After that, he refused to speak further. Within a month, he disappeared. No hiking trip, no note, no explanation, just gone. Elise Warren closed both cases herself, not because she solved them, but because there was nothing left to follow. No tracks, no locations that stayed consistent, no way to map something that didn't behave like a place. But she wrote one thing in her personal notes, not in the official report, somewhere no one else was meant to see. A predator doesn't always chase. Sometimes it waits until you come to it. Over the years, the stories didn't stop. They just stayed quiet, passed between hikers who knew better than to say too much. The details never match perfectly. Different locations, different conditions, different people. But the core of it never changes. A smell, a pull, a place that isn't a place, and something inside it that doesn't burn wood. It burns something else. Something that doesn't leave remains. No bones, no ash, no trace, just absence, and a scent that lingers just long enough to be remembered. If you ever encounter it, You won't need someone to tell you. You'll recognize it instantly. Not because it's strange, but because it isn't. Because it smells exactly the way it's supposed to. Exactly the way you expect it to. And that's the moment it becomes dangerous. Not when you find it, but when it feels like you already know it. Because that's when you stop questioning it. Stop resisting, stop leaving, and somewhere, deep in the forest where the trees don't quite stand right, the air bends, the shapes shift, and the fire that isn't a fire waits, patient, hungry, familiar. And if you listen closely, just before the smell reaches you, you might hear it. Soft, close, almost welcoming. Stay.